Well, I like to think a viewer for today when it comes to providing a Herculean task associated with today's video. The Kolbrin Bible is not an easy topic to discuss, but at Orange Griffin 8604, I will do my best to potentially tie it to the Urantia papers. And in addition, before we begin, I would like to say that despite knowing the confluence of original texts that construct the Kolbrin Bible, I often found myself wrongfully complaining in my mind due to the lack of continuity I was seeing between the sources, like is seen with many other religious texts. Again, in a lot of ways, this is an eclectic document. In some ways, I believe these texts would have been better served being completed in separate editions, or at least placing the Egyptian and Celtic sources together in separate texts. But I, of course, can see the counter-argument here, to make one single document for size and, of course, publication considerations. At first glance, if we remove the similarities we see in the Adam and Eve story, mighty men of old, and divine and cosmic order, one would consider that the Kolbrin Bible and the Urantia Book have almost contrasting narratives of historical events. However, to make this simpler for everyone, I will make the following biased interpretations as to how I will organize today's video, along with a theory, if you will permit the deviance. The first will include presuming that the Urantia Book is the most accurate representation of the topics we'll be discussing for today. The next will include that due to the Kolbrin's overall tone being at least 3,600 years in the past, that it likely predates the Holy Bible's interpretation of these events. Additionally, I will also highlight that parts of the Kolbrin Bible reads quite often as a children's book, such as the following verse. The waters brought forth fishes and creatures which move about and twist themselves and wiggle in the waters. The serpents and the beasts of terrible aspect which were of yore, and reptiles which creep and crawl. Consequently, this tonality and phrasing suggests to me that if these were original accounts of actual events, that they were rightfully reinterpreted, and dare I say even distorted, to be some early cultural stories that children would hear. Now for my hair-splitting select few out there, yes, I am well aware that not all parts of the Kolbrin read like this, and there are some really advanced parts, and hence is the punchline. That is what the document is, a melting pot of Celtic, Egyptian, and might I add likely Sumerian pizzazz, predating the Old Testament and stemming from oral traditions. Despite what I feel to be obvious distortions due to the confluence of sources and reinterpretations of the story, I do find its essence to be more in line with actual events found in the Holy Bible, which was likely a later reinterpretation of these stories, rather than the Urantia Book when viewed as a whole. This rationale stems from the Kolbrin's cataclysmic stories, associated with flood and fire narratives, and of course, later aspects of Jesus' life that I find to be more in line with the Holy Bible interpretations of these events. But I will also indicate that the advanced civilizations in the Kolbrin Bible may vaguely point to the old Dalmatia of our once planetary prince's capital that were interpretations of a society long ago associated with the Urantia Book. All right, so with these biases out of the way, and a theory currently developing, let's talk about two culprits I would like to point the finger at as to the true origins of these stories. So in other words, who were likely the first ones to originate these stories to these then primitive peoples in the first place? If we simply put aside for the moment the possibility that these stories in the Kolbrin Bible were folklore, and begin assuming that they are shadowy representations of actual human events, the two sources I would presume that these narratives stem from would either be the extremely ancient corporeal staff of Caligastia, of which I would imagine would represent either 500,000 years ago, found in 66.0.2, to about 200,000 years ago, when the Lucifer Rebellion began, according to the Urantia Book. These numbers are staggering, meaning that if we were to assume that a majority of these God and origin concepts came from these initial teachers of God, then they would have at least 200,000 years to confabulate and butcher these stories entirely. More likely, in my mind, We can posit that these stories originated from our vice-regent planetary prince, Makaventa Melchizedek, who was then known as the Sage of Salem. Salem is the region that is also known as the southern Levant region of Canaan, which is the lower eastern hill of Jerusalem, near the Gihon Spring. Does this ring any bells for Urantia scholars? Since that day of his arrival was roughly 4,000 years ago, in 93 2.1. Now, the true origins of at least parts of the Kolbrin Bible start developing nicely, at least when it comes to corroborating dates. Again, of that 3,600 years ago. It should be indicated that the landscape of this alternative scripture is vast and varied, populated by texts that claim to reveal hidden truths, lost stories, or divine revelations beyond the mainstream religious canon of both the Holy Bible and the Urantia Book. Though these books differ in style, origin, and reception from the Kolbrin, they share a common fascination with humanity's destiny, the nature of divinity, and the cosmic order. If we were to submit to the Sage of Salem's proposed narrative, then it was a work that Makaventa threaded together in the past to suit the times, much like Moses did, conforming to the belief systems and level of intelligence they were dealing with. To piece more of the dots together here, the Sage of Salem was the one who was at first misperceived by Abraham as being God themselves, to be later termed the God of Salem, found in 93 5.13. And both Abraham and Makaventa had a strong connection with Egypt, found in 93 5.8. So, the henotheism claims of the Kolbrin of a supreme deity and lower-level small g gods isn't that outlandish here, especially when compared directly against the Urantia Book. The only loophole that I believe Catholicism finds here is that Jesus Christ is the eternal Son and a part of the original triune, which is God themselves, rather than the Urantian perception being that the eternal Son is actually channeled through Jesus. But Jesus themselves is very much a separate personality and should also be the one of which it is more appropriate to pray to. Despite prayers to the Universal Father most certainly being accepted via your adjuster and I believe being rerouted to the Eternal Son, it is in fact Jesus Christ Michael who is the one that typically is meant to receive these messages. As a fun fact, the Kolbrin Bible makes a reference to an abode of uncreated light, which ever remains unextinguishable, with quote-unquote no understandable eye that can ever behold it, found in the Kolbrin's creation story. Sounds like the light without heat phenomenon that we find associated with non-spiritual manifestations of deities, found in 2.3 of the Urantia Book. Considering that the once Sage of Salem is our current vice-regent planetary prince with a possible claim to the eventual planetary prince's seat, it is not outside the realm of possibilities that they can be promoted to our planetary sovereign, and would henceforth be known to many as God of Urantia, found in 55 7.3, during our era of light and life, ages from now. In an attempt to get your bearings here for new viewers, the Urantia Book emerged in mid-20th century America, published in 1955 by the Urantia Foundation in Chicago. Its origins are shrouded in mystery. The book claims to have been authored by celestial beings, transmitted through a process involving a small group of individuals known as the Contact Commission. The term Urantia is introduced as the name for Earth, and the book positions itself as the Fifth Epochal Revelation, following earlier divine interventions such as the teachings of Jesus. Its purpose is to unify science, philosophy, and religion into a coherent cosmology. And for those of you that are new to the Kolbrin Bible, by contrast, it surfaced publicly in New Zealand in the 1990s, published by the Hope Trust and later by the Codian Trust. It is presented as a collection of 11 books, 6 of Egyptian origin and 5 of Celtic origins. The narrative surrounding its preservation is dramatic and intriguing. Fragments allegedly survived the burning of Glastonbury Abbey in the 12th century, were safeguarded by a secret society or two and were eventually compiled into modern English. Whether these claims are historically accurate remains to be debated. However, it's a good story. And they contribute to the aura of mystery surrounding the Kolbrin. Unlike the Urantia Book, which is a single unified text, the Kolbrin is an anthology, eclectic and fragmentary. The Kolbrin Bible is less systemic than the Urantia papers. Its Egyptian books include creation myths, wisdom literature, and accounts of cataclysms. They describe humanity's struggle to live in harmony with divine law, often framed in moralistic terms. The Celtic book emphasizes moral teachings, wisdom traditions, and narratives tied to Britain's ancient past. Together, they form a patchwork of myth, history, and prophecy. Unlike the Urantia Book's structured cosmology, the Kolbrin reads like a collection of partially damaged texts salvaged from antiquity. They endured fires, environmental decay, and human error, representing painstaking efforts by its caretakers to piece all of this back together again as a unified text. The Urantia Book presents a vast cosmology that was partially collected through a sleeping subject, and then the other half of the text simply materialized on its own in its own mysterious way. God is described in the text as the universal Father, the source of all creation. The Trinity or Triune is elaborated in detail, and the universe is depicted as a hierarchical structure of superuniverses, local universes, and planetary systems. Much like in the Kolbrin, many entities in that text share some type of lineage to God themselves, which would support religions that have lesser deities. Humanity is portrayed as part of a grand evolutionary plan, guided by celestial beings. The destiny of the soul is to ascend through the universes, ultimately achieving union with God. This vision is both scientific and theological, attempting to reconcile modern cosmology with spiritual truth. The Kolbrin's cosmology is more mythic. Its Egyptian books describe creation in terms of primordial chaos, divine order, and cataclysmic events. They emphasize the fragility of human civilization and the need to live in harmony with divine law. The Celtic books focus less on cosmology and more on moral teachings, emphasizing virtues such as honesty, courage, and compassion. The Kolbrin's theology is less systemic than the Urantia books, but it conveys a sense of divine justice and cosmic order. It contains perhaps distant traces surrounding the Sage of Salem's teachings, which includes references to an unseen God, rather than an unseen Father, a term used several times in the Urantia Book. Both texts, the Urantia Book and the Kolbrin Bible, emphasize Jesus, though in different ways. The Urantia Book devotes its final section to an elaborate account of Jesus' life, including details not found in the New Testament. It portrays him as both the Son of God and a cosmic figure whose mission was part of a larger divine plan. This narrative fills the gaps left by the canonical Gospels, offering readers a more complete picture of Jesus' life and teachings. The Kolbrin, while not a Christian text per se, contains Celtic writings that reflect early Christian influences. These writings emphasize moral teachings and the importance of living in harmony with divine law. They echo themes familiar to Christian readers, such as the importance of compassion, honesty, and faith. Some enthusiasts claim that the Kolbrin corroborates biblical events, such as the Exodus, though these claims are contested. The Gospel of Theology, which is also known as the Kolbrin Gospel of Jesus Christ, is perhaps the most compelling of these references that are associated with Celtic merchants that claim to have met both Jesus and his family. A likely possibility that the Urantia Book's account of Jesus' exposure to merchants would most certainly support. It is considered to be the second volume or companion associated to the Kolbrin Bible. Jesus is seen as a teacher of wisdom, with sayings and parables that are similar to Urantian references. and often comes across as being more esoteric and philosophical than the New Testament Bible. As a brief example of some of the deviations in this text, it indicates in chapter 5 of the Kolbrin that Jesus Christ was the greatest manifestation of the power of the Holy Spirit seen on earth, a claim that the Urantia Book would dispute, considering our universe mother spirit. It should be indicated that many of the expressions in the Kolbrin are most certainly plausible and are often related to previous sayings that Christ Michael was known for. One of my favorites upon brief review is 727, that states, "If you are unsure whether a person's intentions are good or bad, incline in this favor. If anything may be interpreted favorable or otherwise, then interpret favorably." A practice I frequently take when responding to some viewers' comments. Thank you, Jesus. The Urantia Book presents a detailed account of Earth's history, including geological evolution, the origins of humanity, and the development of civilization. It describes Adam and Eve as real beings that were not quite human, being part of a divine plan to uplift humanity. It also recounts the history of religion, portraying figures such as Moses and Buddha within a larger cosmic framework. These historical claims are presented as revelations, though they are not supported by some mainstream scholars. The Kolbrin's historical claims are more fragmentary. Its Egyptian books describe cataclysms that some interpret as accounts of ancient disasters, possibly linked to volcanic eruptions or celestial events. As an example, we can find in chapter 4, under the deluge, when it indicates, "It is written in the great book of the Firehawks that Earth was destroyed twice, once altogether by fire, and once partially by water." The destruction of water was the lesser destruction and came about in this manner. The Urantia Book would support the second part of the statement, surrounding that more localized flooding had once occurred throughout the ages, but was not the worldwide catastrophic natural event that the Bible indicated. Nor would the Urantia Book indicate that an all-powerful, all-wise, and of course timeless entity, or creator being, would want to destroy their creation, in which such an all-powerful entity would have every creative power to remedy, if of course it was their will. The Kolbrin's Celtic books recount Britain's ancient past, including references to Joseph of Arimathea and early Christian influences. The Kolbrin also contains prophecies, warning of future disasters such as the Days of Doom. Some readers interpret these as references to environmental or cosmic upheavals, including the possibility of a rogue planet or Planet X. The Kolbrin Bible mentions an object referred to as the Destroyer in its Egyptian text and the Frightener in its Celtic texts, which is interpreted by proponents as the Planetary X theory, as a reference to the hypothetical planet, also sometimes associated with Nibiru, with the same 3,600-year orbit associated with Sumerian traditions. The Urantia Book has inspired a global community of readers and study groups, and of course, this channel. Organizations such as the Urantia Foundation and the Urantia Book Fellowship promote its teachings. It has been translated into multiple languages. While select mainstream scholars dismiss some of its claims, it remains in print and continues to attract readers seeking a grand vision of existence. The Kolbrin Bible, by contrast, has remained obscure. It is often dismissed by scholars as pseudepigraphia or modern fabrication. Its appeal lies more in fringe communities, conspiracy theorists, and those drawn to alternative prophecies. It has been linked to survivalist movements, with some readers interpreting its warnings as guidance for preparing for future disasters. Some of the texts have trace elements of the Sage of Salem's teachings of the Unseen Father, a singular God, and the references to the Most High. I often connect these references to the Most Highs of Urantia in the Urantia Book, who are also known as the gods of Urantia in 93.3.4. Another distant connection to the Sage of Salem can be found in chapter 15 under the Voice of God that indicates that my desire is for love rather than futile sacrifices of burnt offerings, possibly referencing 93.4.3 of the Urantia Book, a then radical teaching of Melchizedek, greatly deviating from the old ways. Unlike the Urantia Book, which seeks legitimacy as a spiritual revelation, the Kolbrin thrives in its margins, where mystery and speculation fuel its allure. When it comes to my first glance of this document, it's really hard to get a steady pulse on the narration style and variations between these texts. The text presents to me as a great example of how ancient texts can blur the line between fact and folklore, such as the distortion when it stated that man had once walked with God, which Urantia supporters would say is inaccurate, likely referencing the voice in the garden, who was a seraphim. While the Urantia Book might also have many authors with differing narration tones, they generally do not contradict their similar messages of a unifying, benevolent, and merciful God, and will sometimes attempt to explain its concepts towards a heightened degree than any other religious text I have encountered. For readers, both texts offer points of fascination. The Urantia Book's detailed account of Jesus' life, including his interactions with his family and disciples, provides a narrative that fills gaps left by the New Testament. Its cosmology, describing billions of inhabited worlds and the destiny of the human soul, appeals to those seeking a grand vision of existence. The Kolbrin's Egyptian books, with their creation myths and accounts of cataclysms, intrigue readers who wonder about lost civilizations, and those in which question the origins of ancient knowledge. Its Celtic books, with moral precepts and wisdom literature, connect two traditions of Druidic and early Christian thought. The Kolbrin's references to future disasters, including the days of doom, resonate with readers concerned about environmental or cosmic threats. In summary, both texts, the Urantia Book and the Kolbrin Bible, share an equal concern for humanity's spiritual destiny and the role of divine truth in guiding history. Both challenge mainstream religious narratives, offering alternative visions of truth. It would, of course, be a stretch to say that the entire works relate to any one source of belief. Yet, there are trace elements of the Sage of Salem's teachings identified in select pages, likely correlating more with the Kolbrin Bible's earlier 6 Egyptian works, of which I take far greater interest in. Despite both texts differing in origin, style, and reception, the Urantia Book is a modern revelation, systemic and cosmological, while the Kolbrin is an eclectic anthology, rooted in myth and history stemming from multiple regions. The Urantia Book seeks legitimacy in its spiritual revelation, while the Kolbrin thrives in obscurity, appealing to fringe communities. Both continue to fascinate readers, not because they are widely accepted, but because they offer alternative visions of truth that invite exploration and debate. Taken together, the Urantia Book and, of course, the Kolbrin Bible illustrate the enduring human desire for revelation, mystery, and meaning. They remind us that beyond the mainstream canon, there exists a rich tapestry of alternative scriptures, each offering its own vision of truth. Whether one sees them as divine revelations, historical curiosities, or modern fabrications, they continue to inspire curiosity, debate, and reflection. Even the Urantia Book capitulates that even the missionaries' teachings of the Sage of Salem were later submerged in the older and more universal superstitions and beliefs such as the Great Mother, Sun, and other religious cults found in 93.7.3 that can most certainly see its connection with the Kolbrin Bible. Thank you again for watching today's video, your continued support, and I'll see you on the next one.